In 1912, the unsinkable Titanic met its tragic end in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. Over 1,500 souls were lost, and history was changed forever. But what if the ship that sank wasn't actually the Titanic? According to one of the most persistent conspiracy theories in maritime history, the Titanic was secretly swapped with her nearly identical sister ship, the Olympic, in a massive insurance scam gone wrong. It sounds ridiculous, right? But stick with me, because this story has twists that might just make you question everything you thought you knew about the world's most famous shipwreck. To truly understand the conspiracy theory at the heart of this story, we have to journey back in time. Back to the turn of the 20th century, a period of unprecedented technological ambition and fierce national pride. This was the golden age of ocean liners, an era when the battle for supremacy on the high seas was a global obsession. For the titans of industry and the nations they represented, size, luxury, and speed were the ultimate status symbols. Each new vessel a declaration of power and progress. The North Atlantic shipping lanes weren't just trade routes, they were a battlefield for prestige. At the forefront of this conflict were two British giants, the Cunard Steamship Company and the White Star Line. For years they were locked in a bitter rivalry, but by 1907, Cunard had dealt a stunning blow. They launched two revolutionary ships, the Lusitania and the Mauretania. These sister ships were marvels of engineering, capable of speeds that left all competitors in their wake. They quickly captured the coveted Blue Riband, the award for the fastest transatlantic crossing, and with it, the public's imagination. They weren't just ships, they were symbols of Britain's maritime dominance, heavily subsidized by the British government to serve as armed merchant cruisers in wartime. White Star Line was on the defensive. Their chairman, J. Bruce Ismay, knew they couldn't compete with Cunard on speed. The Mauretania was simply too fast. So, he devised a new strategy. If they couldn't be the fastest, they would be the biggest and the most luxurious. They would build ships so grand, so opulent, that speed would become an afterthought. The plan was to create floating palaces that offered an experience of unparalleled comfort and elegance, making the journey itself the destination. This audacious vision required immense capital, which came from one of the most powerful men in the world, the American financier J.P. Morgan. Morgan had recently consolidated numerous shipping lines into a massive trust, the International Mercantile Marine Company, or IMM. With Morgan's formidable financial backing, White Star Line commissioned the Belfast shipyard Harland and Wolff to build not one, but three colossal sister ships. They would be known as the Olympic class, the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic. These ships were designed to be the crown jewels of Morgan's maritime empire. At nearly 900 feet long, they would be the largest man-made moving objects on Earth. Their sheer scale was intended to awe the world and dominate the lucrative transatlantic passenger trade for decades to come. The Olympic, as the lead ship, was built first and launched in 1911. It was, for all intents and purposes, the Titanic's twin. Only a few minor design tweaks would later set them apart. The Olympic's maiden voyage was a triumph, celebrated by the press and public alike. But this success was short-lived. Just 5 voyages in, on September 20th, 1911, disaster struck. While leaving Southampton, the Olympic collided with a British Royal Navy cruiser, the HMS Hawke. The collision tore 2 large holes in the Olympic's hull, flooding 2 of its watertight compartments and twisting its propeller shaft. The unsinkable ship limped back to port, badly wounded. This incident, a costly and embarrassing setback, is the critical event that sets the stage for the entire conspiracy theory. On September 20th, 1911, the Olympic collided with a Royal Navy cruiser called the HMS Hawke. The accident tore a massive gash in the ship's hull and bent her frame. Although she managed to limp back to port, the damage was extensive, and more importantly, The White Star Line was found liable, meaning the repairs weren't covered by insurance. This left the company in serious financial trouble. And here's where conspiracy theorists say things took a sinister turn. According to the theory, White Star decided to swap the ships. The damaged Olympic would be disguised as the brand new Titanic. The real Titanic, still under construction, would quietly become the new Olympic. The plan, theorists say, was simple. Send the disguised Olympic, posing as Titanic on one final voyage, sink it accidentally, and collect the insurance payout for the Titanic, a ship that was technically brand new and fully insured. But if that was the plan, something went horribly wrong. On April 15, 1912, the ship struck an iceberg and went down with more than 1,500 people aboard. To the outside world, the sinking of the Titanic was a straightforward, albeit horrific, maritime disaster. But for proponents of the switch theory, the official story is a carefully constructed facade. They believe that by examining the historical record with a skeptical eye, a different narrative emerges, one built on a foundation of subtle, yet damning pieces of evidence. These aren't just random anomalies. To theorists, they are the breadcrumbs deliberately left behind, pointing to a conspiracy of staggering proportions. Let's delve into the specific claims that form the bedrock of this enduring theory. The most cited piece of physical evidence is the porthole configuration. Archival photographs of the Olympic show an uneven spacing of portholes on its forward sea deck. In contrast, photos of the Titanic during its construction in Belfast show evenly spaced portholes. However, photographs of the ship that sailed from Southampton, the one the world knew as Titanic, clearly show the same uneven porthole pattern as the Olympic. Theorists argue this isn't a simple design change. It's proof that the ship leaving port wasn't the one that was built. Adding to the suspicion is the alleged lack of public scrutiny. The Titanic's final inspection before her maiden voyage was unusually private. Unlike other major launches of the era, which were celebrated with public tours and press access, the Titanic was kept largely under wraps. Theorists contend this secrecy wasn't for efficiency, but to prevent anyone from noticing the switch, to keep prying eyes from spotting telltale signs of wear and tear on a ship that was supposed to be brand new. The timeline of events in the Harland and Wolff shipyard is another cornerstone of the theory. After the Olympic's collision in 1911, it required extensive repairs. Conspiracy theorists claim this repair period overlaps suspiciously with the Titanic's final outfitting. They paint a picture of a frantic, covert operation where, under the cover of darkness, the two sister ships were swapped in dry dock. The damaged Olympic, now masquerading as Titanic, was patched up just enough to be seaworthy, while the pristine, newly built Titanic was quietly rebranded as the Olympic to begin a long and profitable career. But who would have the power and motive to orchestrate such a monumental deception? Theorists point to one man, the powerful American financier, J.P. Morgan. As the owner of the White Star Line's parent company, Morgan was not just a passenger, he was the ship's ultimate owner. His high-profile booking on the maiden voyage was a major publicity coup. Yet, just hours before departure, he mysteriously canceled his trip, citing illness. For theorists, this isn't a coincidence, it's the action of a man who knew the ship was doomed. The most sinister version of the theory goes even further. It claims the switch wasn't just about insurance fraud. On board the Titanic were several prominent and wealthy men, including John Jacob Astor IV and Benjamin Guggenheim, who were vocal opponents of Morgan's plan to create the Federal Reserve. By sinking the ship, Morgan could eliminate his most powerful adversaries in one fell swoop, paving the way for his financial ambitions. But while the switch theory is a tantalizing story of corporate deception, it's a narrative that crumbles under the weight of evidence. When you look past the surface-level anomalies and consult the world's leading maritime historians and researchers, a much clearer, fact-based picture emerges. They don't just disagree with the theory, they systematically dismantle it. piece by painstaking piece. Let's start with the portholes, a cornerstone of the conspiracy. Proponents point to photos showing a different number of portholes on the sea deck of the ship that sailed from Southampton versus the ship in the shipyard. But maritime historians Steve Hall and Bruce Beveridge, in their definitive book, Titanic or Olympic, Which Ship Sank?, provide a simple explanation. Both ships were constantly being modified. Titanic had extra suites added to its B deck, which required changes to the C deck below, including the addition of 2 more portholes. These weren't signs of a switch, they were signs of last-minute luxury upgrades before her maiden voyage. The Olympic itself underwent similar refits over its long career, making simple photo comparisons unreliable. Then there's the insurance motive, the very engine of the alleged scam. Historian Mark Chirnside has extensively researched this claim and found it financially illogical. The Titanic cost approximately $7.5 million to build, a colossal sum in 1912. However, it was only insured for $5 million. Sinking the ship would not result in a clever profit. It would guarantee a staggering loss of $2.5 million, not to mention the loss of revenue from a brand new flagship liner. For a company like White Star Line, whose entire business model depended on reputation and reliability, orchestrating such a disastrous and financially ruinous stunt makes no business sense whatsoever. But the most conclusive evidence lies silently on the ocean floor. Every ship built at the Harland and Wolff shipyard was assigned a unique yard number. The Olympic's was 400, the Titanic's was 401. This number was stamped onto countless components throughout the vessel, from major structural elements to smaller fittings. Since the wreck's discovery in 1985, explorers have documented these numbers time and time again. On propellers, on engine parts, and on sections of the hull, the number is always the same, 401. If this were the Olympic, we would expect to find the number 400. We don't, not once. The physical, irrefutable evidence confirms it. The ship resting nearly 2.5 miles beneath the surface of the Atlantic is, without any doubt, the RMS Titanic. So why does this theory persist? Because it's irresistible. It mixes wealth, tragedy, and mystery, and it gives people a reason to question the powerful, like J.P. Morgan. In the end, the Titanic story doesn't need a conspiracy to be fascinating. It's already a tragedy of human ambition, arrogance, and fate. But still, it's hard not to wonder, in an age of secrecy and corporate power, could something like this ever happen again? Thanks for watching. And if you love diving into conspiracies that blur the line between myth and reality, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's strangest mysteries.